Good morning, everyone. Do you have 20 minutes, right? Okay. So I have 50 slides and one video for 20 minutes. I had to be very quick. I'm going to talk about hype about blockchain. So perhaps you have been hearing hype a lot. At the same time, last year, the big topic is hype and the reality, or sometimes hype and the evidence. So there was a quite negative comments on the development of hype last year. And then now, what I'm going to do is, what is the reality of this discussion behind hype versus reality? We have examined lots of cases within the UN system. I'm trying to go through quickly what's happening in the UN, and then I'm going into the detail of the hype, this debates about hype and the reality. I have to be quick, and then how to move on this slide? Okay, this is the content. So for first two, I'm just going through quickly, and the last two, I'm going into a little bit detail. This is generally the situation. I think it's in the private, the public sectors. Maybe 2017 or 16, we suddenly started talking about the blockchain as a miraculous solution for everything. And then maybe your boss said, oh, do something about blockchain. So this is the kind of situation we faced in the UN system. We started organizing a small group of blockchain, just research on the blockchain, how it could help us. And then we called for the meeting of almost the entire UN system. When you say UN system, it's about 60 different UN organizations. It's not really coherent, centralized system. Or it's not even decentralized. Some people said it's just disorganized. But 60 organizations in the one system. So for the first call for the meeting, only 3 people are gathered in one room. This is the beginning of debate on the blockchain in UN system. 2017 started. A little bit more people started coming into the meeting. August 2017, if you remember, huge ICO booms everywhere, day by day. So among UN systems, people started noticing, oh, something happening outside the UN. Let's get on the same boat. That's the situation. And then 2018, more and more UN organizations started getting on the same boat. And then still, we didn't know what to do. There seemed to be something really nice, but where to find? 2018, I think more and more people started talking to the tech community seriously, and then discussion start discovering it's not simple solution. It could be completely disruptive, and some people even argue if we go on blockchain, as advocate says, why do we need a UN system? Perhaps we don't need a UN system. So to that extent, the discussion go into the deep level. So now, as of this year, there are so many initiatives you may see in the UN website, wherever. I cannot catch up on everything. Secretary General himself started getting into the digital, everything digital, including blockchain. So this is just a few of the latest. Secretary General organized a high-level panel on digital cooperation. So the people like, I don't know, Jack Ma, Bill Gates, all these billionaire, the heavy hitter in the technology community are gathering. I don't think that itself will produce anything, but that gives a political justification for the ordinary UN worker to get on with this. The last one, the Digital Finance Task Force, some people start thinking about, oh, blockchain, cryptocurrency, crypto asset, whatever it is, maybe it could help the almost permanent shortage of the budget for the UN. So there are lots of different approaches happening now. Just next one quickly. This is my organization from end of the 2016 till now. We try to test lots of different approaches everywhere, quite randomly. In 2017 alone, I think I talked to about 200 different startups, almost major players in the same space. We have a conversation. This is, I just quickly go through some of the things we did. One of the tangible results is a book. It's still downloadable. If you are interested in the legal aspects of blockchain, you can go to the website and you can download. It's free. So disconnect. Where is the disconnect? I go through quickly the conceptual disconnect. And then after that, a couple of examples I'm going to share. Maybe you have the same experience. Many people ask you, what is a blockchain? And you try to explain as accurately as possible. And the end result is just a question mark. So what are you talking about? So this kind of the explanation does not get through anywhere in the normal conversation. So instead of going into this debate, I just want to share one video.
We communicate who we are through clothing. It is fundamentally a part of what we wish to communicate about ourselves.
We used to have a system, a fashion system. That has absolutely nothing to do with the fashion industry today. It has been reinvented.
It's based on materialism. The problem is that comes at a really high price.
Garment factory collapsed, killing more than 1,000.
Clashes between clothes factory workers and riot police in Cambodia.
Last November, 112 people were killed in another major factory fire. 30,000 Chinese workers have been on strike.
Garment workers in Bangladesh paying the price for cheap clothing.
Well, the promise of globalization was that it was going to be a win-win. Consumers in the rich world would get cheaper goods and people in the poorer parts of the world would get jobs, and that those jobs would give them an opportunity to work their way out of poverty.
This enormous, rapacious industry that is generating so much profit, why is it that it is unable to support millions of its workers properly?
The actual business model is completely unsustainable. Unless you change that model, you can't change anything.
When everything is concentrated on making profits, what you see is that human rights, the environment, workers' rights get lost.
My God, we can do better than this.
So this has nothing to do with blockchain itself, but when we talk to the tech community, this is what we want to solve. That's what we say. And to do that, what can we do? And this, when I saw this one, it reminds me of so many things. I spent the first 15 years of my career in the war zone, Kabul, Kandahar, Baghdad, Mogadishu, always in the middle of war. And then it's in a sense, it's a series of massive failure. UN cannot just cope with any type of disaster at the moment. And then failure after failure. What's wrong with us? That's a permanent question every day that annoys us. And when I saw this one, oh, it's the same thing. Something fundamentally wrong. What's wrong? And then we have a problem. We have a huge number of problems always on the table. When I go to the office, problem after problems, and we need a solution. When we talk to the blockchain expert, the tech community, they bring solution, and they try to find a problem that can fit to their solution. Its approach is totally upside down, opposite. So that is a very big fundamental cause of the disconnect between the hype and the reality. What they're talking about accountability, transparency, efficiency, traceability, security. There's so many nice words, and then just they fall short of how blockchain related to this one. There are explanations. I just quickly show that. Yes, there is an explanation. Why security is better? Why transparency better? Because there is no censorship, there is no central system, there is no single point of failure. All this kind of explanation goes to the what we want, but it's not very well explained to the ordinary people who are working, running around in the field. They're every day, 24/7 working, and then we are not good at communicating with them what could be done. That fashion industry's problem, that small hierarchy, chain of hierarchy, and a big hierarchy. There is no way to trace anything from the beginning to end. And then in the end, when I go to the Fifth Avenue in Manhattan and buy my clothes, behind that, how can I know it's a product of the slavery, child labor, sexual harassment? There are so many things behind one clothes, but no way to know that. So that's what's happening. It's the same in the logistics in the humanitarian, the peacekeeping setup. On the surface, something looking nice, but behind that, we don't know what's happening. More concretely, I just go through a few of the examples. These are examples. I don't think I can go everything. The first one, between the UN and tech, conversation is not really effective. It's not productive yet. On the one side, we're talking about something really untechnological thing. On the other side, people bring, hey, blockchain technology is here. We can help you. How can you help? They can realize if we want to have a Rolling Stones concert, it takes enormous time, enormous logistics challenge. Everyone can imagine. But if you ask, can you help refugee tomorrow? You'll be surprised. They said yes. No way. Refugee problem. Tomorrow, 1,000 people come here. How can you deal with? That's a situation, but it's so naively, some technologists believe it can be done. No way. So that's a huge tension between the aid workers and the tech communities. First mile issue, I think some of the session touched upon this one. Blockchain is about data layer. Oh, that's fine, good, excellent. But we are dealing with reality. And there is always, entry point, exit point, the world of data, world of reality. So how we get in? The aid worker knows that getting people registered for the assistance is a nightmare. You receive hundreds and hundreds of refugees or IDP or just normal migrants. You have to check them. You have to find out their names and age. But there are sick people, babies crying, and old people dying. That's the situation, and we have to get all the information. That is a moment it might go into the data layers. We get all the information, we go back to the office, put them into the computer, and then from then on, maybe blockchain could be useful. But always, entry point, we have to think about it. On just governance of blockchain, this is also covered by some of the sessions. Yes, blockchain decentralized. Nobody does data. Nobody steals it. It's not manipulated. It's not controlled. That's fine. But when we start talking to the blockchain expert, so what about the blockchain itself? How it works? Yes, there are some of them completely autonomous. Nobody is controlling. But look at carefully about 2,000 blockchains. Many of them controlled by somebody who created. So what's the point of blockchain? We are reinventing central authority within the blockchain. That's a ridiculous notion. But since we are so amateur, we are not professional blockchain, we just keep on listening. And now we start realizing, some of the blockchain really not really achieving anything. Cost of complexity. This is often talked about in the context of the consumption of the electricity power. Oh, Bitcoin consumes too much power. Well, there is a certain truth, but it's not completely truth. The data used is not really accurate. But the point is, yes, when we say blockchain, it is a fact that it needs lots of computational power. So if we want to use blockchain, you really have to think about at the cost of the huge increased computational power, what you want to achieve. What you want to achieve is independence from the authority, dictators, manipulators. If that is very important, it's worth trying to use blockchain. Legal regulatory issue also, this is touched upon many times. We are not living in a vacuum. We're dealing with about 200 different countries. Some people come up with a brilliant idea of a blockchain using the international system, and then in the end, we end up hitting the wall of the jurisdiction of each nation state. So that's, you like or not, that's the reality. We have to get into all these legal battles. So most of the time within the UN, we spend discussion time with the legal department and treasury. Not much technical people. Self-sovereign identity, it's nice. It's a really cool concept. Basically, we can be independent. My identity can be independent of whichever country I belong to. So that's nice. So my country could be a dictatorship or could be corrupted. But if I don't rely on my government, I'm independent. I cannot be manipulated by those people, those government. So that's an excellent concept, particularly in the case of international aid communities. The lack of identity is a huge problem. We want to give them identity, but independent from any kind of the authorities. The concept is good, But it's not really simple. To establish somebody's identity, anyway, you have to rely on certain level of relations with one individual to others. So it's a collection of the information, collection of relation makes up one identity. In the end, it could not be called self-sovereign. It's a community sovereign identity at best. But I think because of this sounds of self-sovereign identity, it sounds good. It's so much talked about. But in reality, it's so difficult. We try to apply this in the human trafficking situation or organ trafficking situation. It's a horrible crime. It's happening every day. People are sold, bought, people's organs in the market. So that's a reality. How can we tackle this problem? Because their identity, passport, ID card are all connected to the government, which is corrupted, so which is a part of the problem. So as long as we rely on such a government-certified identity, we cannot solve this problem. Physical world, digital world, I skip this, the same thing. We have to deal with two things. Last mile issue in financial services, we spend massive amount of time on this one because UN is just crazy maze of the system. One point after the next point, money goes through from the beginning to the end. So UN rely on the contribution of the people and the government, and we receive money, and it goes to some other place, many other places. From the entry to the exit, so many transactions happens. And then to make sure everything is accountable, so much workload of the reporting also generated. With this is a simplified chart. Why we spend so much money? One estimate, UN money is like $50 to $60 billion every year. 30% of the money is missing on the way. That is the estimate. It's a huge amount. To save this 30% of the $60 billion, why don't we skip all this, stage by stage? So that is the idea of blockchain. Is it possible or not? Perhaps technically possible. We invited Treasury and legal expert, everyone within the system. Is it any way we can do this? There are so many issues. We use ERP system, whether it's SAP or Oracle, whatever. And then there is no way, there is no ticker of Bitcoin, for example. How can we receive Bitcoin? That's a simple problem start. Hey, UN is authorized to have a Bitcoin wallet or Ether wallet or Dash wallet. We don't know. So that's the answer. So from the very basic thing, we had to start discussion. Anyway, let's say if it's possible, we deal with the two different economies. Both sides, fiat economy, that's what we are living. We're using US dollars, the euros, or whatever. And then at one point, if we want to use the blockchain, crypto economy start. So inside this, let's skip everything, all banking transactions. We don't need any more. We go straight from the entry to exit. But what to do with this point, entry point, exit point? That's really annoying part. When we talk to the tech community, they talk about only inside. Say outside, it's not our territory. But we have to deal with both sides. Well, privacy, anonymity is bad. That's the general concept. But that's a really big misunderstanding. Money laundering, if we want to stop money laundering, you should stop using cash. As long as you use crypto assets, no matter how it's anything digital, leave a trace of the transaction. So for the law enforcement authority, crypto asset is much better than cash. At the same time, privacy, without privacy, there is no economic activities. If you are part of the company, you deal with another company, you send $100 million to another company can see what's the balance of a bank account. There is no way to have a business transaction. So privacy is a really essential part, but it's not easy. But I think I finished with this one. Implementation is really, really difficult. The blockchain is not Swiss Army knife. There's so many things to think about it. But still, we have to keep this in mind. There are so many problems that cannot be solved by the current system. So we have to find something else. The problem caused by the current system often caused by the system itself. Based on the centralized system in the nation-state era, legal normative framework or accounting framework, everything is established under the centralized system. So that we should start doubting, is there any other alternative way of people living? So that is a potential blockchain. So we cannot just throw away, this is discussion between the hype and reality, that's bullshit, let's go next discussion. There is a huge potential within the blockchains. Blockchain is not simple technology. It's about philosophy. It's about political system. It's about economic system. So if we narrowly looking at blockchain as a part of IT or something, then we fail to see the entire possibility of the next human beings society. That's my rebuff to the criticism. I skip all of that, addendum. These when we start thinking about we should use the blockchain or not, there is a decision tree, lots of different entities making this, Homeland Security. I will share all of this slide with everyone if you want. So, this is just in many cases, this is our state.
Hello, everyone. So my question is about UN trial on blockchain in the Jordan refugee camp. The Building Blocks program, I think is the name. You think that this program can be the first step to really implement the blockchain in the UN and in the UN mission?
Question is it first step or not? Well, that's it's debatable. We have a lot of discussion about that attempt. We're positively thinking it's a good attempt to make use of a blockchain, how it could work in a narrowly defined closed area. On the other hand, the criticism is that it's not even blockchain. There is just one node. It's a centralized, basically it's just one computer. So what's the point of what is the point of calling it blockchain? We don't need to say it. But anyway, the small part of the blockchain technology, we don't know, they didn't know at that time how it works. To see, experiment, that's a good thing. We don't need to, shut down. Well, anyway, there is a different views. Some, not really like it. some people take it positively. You know that this discussion, it's just one node, and it's increased 4 nodes, but anyway, it's closed areas. It's not public blockchain.
Thank you for a very wonderful presentation and giving us a complete perspective. My question is from a user perspective. The use of blockchain or the application of blockchain implies a complete change of business model, which involves a change of the procedures, the policies, and the processes. And from a user perspective, are the users who are willing to experiment with blockchain, are they prepared to undergo that massive transformation?
I think user experience of a blockchain, even pick up one small app or wallet of a crypto asset, it's the worst part of the current blockchain. It's really hard to explain simple wallet. I gave up explaining what wallet is, how it works to my mother. No way to explain that. But there are lots of attempts. I've been working with the Netherlands government for 2 years. One was a book was shown. So what they did is, for example, blockchain developers organized a seminar for the high-ranking official of the Netherlands government, and they don't know anything about blockchain. So they asked them to download wallet in their mobile phone, and then they gave certain amount of money, asset, to the wallet, and then invite them to the lunch, and they are forced to pay for lunch with wallet. So somehow we have to experiment again and again, but the user experience, user interface is horrible at the moment. Maybe a couple of years required to get it normal. That's my feeling.
Okay, we have time for a last question, please.
There is an idea that highly corrupted countries could really benefit from having blockchain. Open, public, and censored system, not centralized DOT. But they won't because actually kleptocratic governments run their countries. On the other side, there are prosperous, developed countries, and their governments do not have real incentives to implement this system. Why? The system more or less works good, though imperfect. So do you think this is a deadlock for a future of the blockchain? If not, what's your opinion how to introduce these systems?
Well, fundamentally, blockchain should not be the product influenced by the government. So the question that some governments very proactively promote blockchain, use of blockchain. Others don't actively do that. In principle, it shouldn't matter. It should be independent. And then more extreme case, maybe it's difficult. Australia is a well-established country, or maybe USA. They are a well-established country. The system is working, whether there's a problem or not. Anyway, system is working. But some countries, the system is not working. Look at Venezuela, Zimbabwe, those countries. It's dysfunctional. In those situations, I think there is a much bigger motivation among ordinary people to make use of blockchain. So my view is it doesn't matter how government wants, what government wants. In principle, blockchain should be like that. Well, of course, friendly government, it's nice. And US government is a typical case, depending on the states. Some states are very rigid. They don't like blockchain. other states like Illinois or Wyoming, they're pushing very hard to make use of blockchain. They think that is the economic leverage for the next era.
Okay, so just the last question and then we will close.
Sorry, I just wanted to clarify. Fernando de Soto wrote his book about land ownership, title ownership, and as an example, African countries where people cannot protect their rights for their land, for their property. And this is a matter of the governance to introduce a better system. But if it's highly corrupted, there is no way to use the blockchain because it's out of the legitimate way of the use of this ownership, land ownership.
Yeah, I understand. There are certain cases the government system could utilize the blockchain. In that case, if government is in favor, it could move much more efficiently. Yeah, I understand your point.
All right, thank you. Thank you very much. So look, I just want to just give a few just brief remarks about how we sort of see what's going on here. This is a step towards better globalization, I think, this technology. Blockchain Innovation Hub, we're a bunch of economists who have been looking deeply into the economic impact of blockchain technology. And what we really see this as Yamamoto was saying, it's not a new technology. This is a new sort of way of building economies and a new sort of political philosophy. And we see the same thing. This is new economic infrastructure that's being built. And what's interesting about this is global economic infrastructure right from the start. It's not infrastructure that's being built at a national level. It's on the internet. It's global right from the start. And what that looks like to us is next generation globalization is coming. And it's built around identity protocols, ways of moving money, ways of moving value and assets and titles and registries, with a private-built, consortia-built, global economic infrastructure that is open access, that has a lot of really nice properties from an accessibility perspective and a fairness and justice perspective, in the sense that it's not fundamentally controlled by a group that can exploit that. And what that sort of political philosophy of economic infrastructure gives us is a way to solve a fundamental problem that, again, Mr. Yamamoto pointed to, was long, complex supply chains are a huge problem in the world today. They're a solution that the 20th century gave us in terms of wealth creation, but they're a massive problem in that they're largely invisible, and things can hide in them. And it's very difficult to keep track of the origin of where things are coming from. So we end up with this distorted economics where so much value is captured at the end of a supply chain, where all the branding and fashion and sort of high-end products goes on. And it's very difficult for value to move from the beginning of a supply chain, which is precisely the point at where we're trying to sort of resolve that with poverty alleviation programs and information tracking. The reason is that information moves very badly along supply chains. Goods move easily along supply chains, but information doesn't, which means that we have provenance problems, which means we have accountability problems, which means that it's very difficult to see into these supply chains across countries, and this is particularly true in a globalized context. So we live in a globalized world. That is not going to change. That is a good thing. What we need to build is economic infrastructure that enables us to live well in such a world with deep, long, complex supply chains in such a way that we have joined up economic infrastructure that is working for everyone along that, not just the people at the end, which is the current world we live in. So we sort of see that as that just fundamental insight of this is next generation globalization. This is fixing the problems with the previous generations of globalization in such a way that we're solving the problem directly by not trying to just recompensate or sort of remediate problems over the top, but just building better infrastructure that works for everyone. And we're right at the beginnings of this process. We're sort of 10 years deep at most, really about 5 years deep in this. And this is an experimental process. This is being not built by one government or whatever. This is being built by everyone. And the challenge is to join this all up. So I think that, we're seeing lots of private consortia doing this in business, sort of IBM and Maersk and TradeLens and so on are doing this around agricultural supply chains. We're seeing the UN come in on this around aid and assistance supply chains and work. But this notion of just next generation infrastructure to make globalization work for everyone. That's what's going on here. That's the sense in which this is not just a new technology. This is a political philosophy for a better world built on better infrastructure. So, I mean, I'm, international trade economist and innovation economist, very excited about this as not just the implications of a new technology, but this is a new way to build a new economic order. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. You may start.
Okay, thank you. Well, I will take a look here more from the practitioner side, someone that has been deeply involved on deploying and implemented government systems for the last 30 years. So I have been a lot of hype, a lot of technologies that have been coming and changing. So we began with punch paper tapes. Then when we moved to a new technology, punched cards, and then we moved to electronic magnetic tapes, hard disks. IBM came with the Josephson junction solution for speed-up computers. And every time we create this new technology, the promise to solve new problems grew up and provide visions for solving the world's problem at that time. And then we keep on moving, so I can talk after the hierarchical database, the hype of relational databases, PCs to solve problems that mainframes could not solve on an individual level. Then we create networks. Networks were not a successful issue. Novell came, new networks, internet arise. So every time we come up with a new technology, there is a hype, there is a maturity, and then the solutions really start to be solved. So I see now, I'm kind of skeptic now on a new technology coming on as blockchain, because I see this hype coming on, and we still need to do some maturity on that technology. If you go to Bing or go to Google and search about weaknesses on blockchain, you will find not 10,000 articles, you'll find more than 4 million articles talking about this weakness. Most of them talk about the same thing, so latency, issues about unfair trade by miners. I mean, there are a lot of problems that you can read on that. So my concern here is that we need to put something more. We need to dedicate more time, let technology mature. Maybe all these points that you present today as a weakness, like privacy, or unreliability, for instance, we were talking about distributed databases. What happened if we cut off internet? Some countries had promised to just take their own internet off of the context. So these issues have not been fully understood and addressed, how blockchain technology can solve it. So maybe technology will evolve to a duality model when we will have blockchain along with something else to overcome the weaknesses that blockchain technology provides today. So I think that's my message, that I've seen these hypes before. I think they're going to be happening again in the future, and the maturity needs to be, we need to leave time to the technology to mature, to big implementations really happen. We still don't know what's going to happen when we start to have billions of records on chains. We don't know how much time we're going to do to process these things. So that maturity needs to happen. New technologies probably come along on the way, but as you mentioned, this will solve a lot of issues, creating a new infrastructure for economic growth and prosperity.
Thank you, Lorenzo.
Thank you.
Harry, please.
Hi, everyone. It's nice being last because I just get to respond to what everyone else said. I think I'm somewhere in the middle of these two standpoints here. For me, I think a key word from Yoshi's presentation was cooperation, and the way that you laid out the complexity of organisations having to work together, and that these are coordination problems that essentially the world is dealing with every day, including things like refugee crisis and the like. And what is kind of interesting, I suppose, from a technology perspective of this particular technology to me, is that it really is because of its distributed nature, for those blockchains that are distributed, it is an alternative to current ways of interacting online. At the moment, if you are a civil society organisation, you are likely to have to go into a contract with a large vendor such as Microsoft or IBM or whomever to do services with them. And we end up having all kinds of difficulties and, I suppose, large societal problems around data economies, platforms and their control over the economy, and civil society, I suppose, kind of beholden to the tech industry and its decision-making processes, which will become increasingly problematic with automation. So what blockchain does, which is interesting, and we're already beginning to see it at this very experimental level, is that it's platforms that are about cooperation, that are about openness, where different organisations can come together on a shared infrastructure to enact their goals and their aims, and where hopefully one day they will be able to do that in a way which does preserve privacy where required. So for me, this is a cooperation infrastructure in a way that we haven't had before. And where we're at the moment, which I'm finding fascinating, is that it is just exposing issues of coordination, as I think we've already heard today. So this technology is there, but where is it in our existing systems that we are failing to coordinate to actually utilise it properly? And so Jason and I are doing some work at the moment with some creative industries institutions in Australia, Australia Council, Afters and Screen Australia. And, you know, this is just an industry, a supply chain that I happen to know well, which is around creative industries. If you look at, for instance, royalties and royalty payments and the opaque data transfer that occurs between streaming services and Netflix, and producers are the ones that are actually losing out here. And there is data to show that creative services are growing, but actual producers are earning less than they ever have before. So, and it's exposing this system, because this is one area which is a data-driven part of our economy that could actually run effectively on these new infrastructures. And there are attempts to try to coordinate royalty payments now. But what we will see is, are the collecting societies going to come to the party? Are the record companies going to get involved? Are these private deals behind closed doors going to continue? And that's where you start to think, well, if this infrastructure exists, and it's not just an infrastructure through which you can run data and transactions and the like, it's also an infrastructure through which you can do law and do regulation, which raises a whole lot of questions. So what is the role of institutions, existing institutions in this, or governments in this, to compel those that are using these technologies to do it openly and transparently, and in ways where those who we would like to see benefit begin to actually benefit from it? So I do think it's a really interesting and important infrastructure. It holds a lot of promise, but we don't know yet. And of course, we can't predict the future as to how it will go. But in the meantime, we need to be keeping an eye on where these existing coordination failures are in society, and whether they continue to be justified. And personally, my expectation and hope here is that it will be through civil society's use of blockchain that we begin places where there are actual needs and organisations that are working hard to address the so-called wicked problems of society, and have great incentives and imperative to do so, where we will start to see that these technologies probably get real traction.
I think that the structure of my presentation is supposed to be, maybe I didn't do a good job, but I wanted to talk about hype, the content of hype, or how good blockchain is. That's the one point. Against that, against each point, I wanted to say some sort of a reservation. So it's not completely rosy technology. There is some difficulties. But that's not where I wanted to stop. What I wanted to say, okay, beyond that, we are looking at something completely new beyond this dichotomy between the rosy color technology and the actual difficulties. And what is something new beyond this dichotomy? What we are looking at? That is a sort of, Jason said, new economy, completely new system. And it's actually difficult to explain what is a new economy because we have to use the available terminology, which define the concept again. They let us back to the past. If we really want to explain the new economy, we may have to end up, creating a new terminology, which has not happened yet. Let's say globalization. Yes, beyond the boundary of a nation state, something new way of transaction may happen. That is what I think that Jason wanted to say. But the globalization comes with very old, implications, state by state, corporate by corporate. So each, like a kingdom, transact each other. That is not new economy. Something new is beyond that. So that's really difficult to explain, but I guess I took what you said.
Okay, thank you very much. And now, please, we have two hands. Yes.
Thank you very much for a really insightful session. I'm Bridget Leek from IBM, so I'm, big tech. And I was really interested in the concept of the fact that we need shared infrastructure in order to drive progress in this space and to maximize the opportunities. However, I see a disconnect between leadership in that space and people willing to step forward and say, yes, okay, because I understand the concept that you need to ensure that platforms remain open to make sure that, the interests of, the corporate world aren't driving the direction of this. But I can't see anywhere where people are standing up and saying yes. In fact, I see the opposite. I see the DTA saying that blockchain is a solution looking for a problem. So how do you recommend that we as a collective actually solve the problem that we have a leadership void in this space?
That's a difficult question. I think first of all, I think the DTA should just be ignored in this. But I think that there's lots of interest in blockchain, and the work that CSIRO and others are doing is showing that Australia is making huge headway. And they might say that's not a government application of it, but in fact governance happens through these technologies. It doesn't have to be by government, but it's compliance, it's registries, all these things we've been talking about anyway. But in terms of leadership and where that kind of idea of a shared infrastructure will come from, there are two approaches at the moment. There's the public blockchain approach, which is kind of building from the grassroots. I'm on something called the Web3 Australia Foundation, Web3 Australia Incorporated Association, which is about to launch in Sydney next week, which is a group of blockchain developers in Australia. We see that as being about the building of decentralized technologies. These are infrastructures which are through incentives that they are able to fund their development and build out, hopefully. So the public blockchains, as they improve scalability, privacy, all of those things, and I think the Enterprise Ethereum Alliance is an interesting example where it's industry experimenting in ways that are at the moment quite closed, but using the Ethereum public blockchain as its kind of consensus mechanism to ensure that at the base level at least it is still decentralized. Then we have things such as Hyperledger and the like, where you could argue that we will see these so-called private blockchains become increasingly decentralized as they get more users and become more, so that they're just, you could say they're starting from different ends of the spectrum, but maybe we will end up in the middle with something which is quite interoperable, where decentralization is just the most robust way of going about it. So, I mean, for me, there's so much technological development that still needs to occur before we can predict how that's going to come about or no. And I think it's worth coming at it from both ways. But at the same time, I would hope that, say, the efforts of IBM or Microsoft or other big companies, tech companies in this space, is to assist and enable the ultimate goal of decentralization, because I don't think that anyone has to lose out here, because these are incentivized apps and architectures. There are ways of, as Jason said, it's an economic infrastructure. This isn't about stopping money from changing hands. It's about doing it in ways which actually upholds our individual agency, autonomy, our privacy, and the rest of it. Problems which I think tech companies more than anyone are aware of right now.
Jason, please.
Yes, I'm a huge fan of what IBM is doing in this space, and the reason is not because it's a big tech company. What IBM is doing is solving a fundamental problem, which is this tech doesn't really work unless you can coordinate lots of users in different places to use the same protocol or the same standard, right? That's the problem. Now, traditionally, how we solve that problem is either vertical integration, which has all sorts of monopoly problems, don't want to do that, or we use government forcing regulation, which just makes it illegal not to use a particular thing. And again, all sorts of problems with that. Whereas the service that IBM is providing in this space is basically a club-like coordination, just simply because you've got lots of clients and you can bring them together into a space to share a common infrastructure or to coordinate the sort of standards problem. And I think it's that solving that coordination and decentralized cooperation problem that is the real powerful contribution that's being provided here, that in a sense can only be provided by a global company that has lots of different connections into different industries and so on. So I think it's more than just a sort of tech versus everyone else sort of thing. This is the adoption problem here is coordination and cooperation. And there's lots of different organizations that can do that. The UN is working on that, but so is IBM. And I think that's where we're up to now.
Okay, we have another question. Boyega, please.
Okay, so my name is Boyega from National University of Ireland in Galway. So I think one of my frustrations generally is that when there are discussions about blockchains, and there's a lot of focus on infrastructure, aspect. So luckily, Jason, you mentioned about the global economic system, and in the last response, I'm beginning to hear a bit about the governance, because I think there are at least three perspectives to blockchains, which is the infrastructure, the global economic, and the governance, particularly when which is one aspect that you never even hear about. And I think most of the problem is simply because of the lack of understanding about the original fundamental blockchain philosophy in that. But if we were, and I'm going to assume that that the experts there would know about the governance, aspect, the self-organization beyond the state concept. Again, I'm assuming that you will have read the work of Dominic Frisby, books in these areas. I wonder if you have any thought on if we could actually deploy this, particularly in the UN, if you're talking about systems where you have very weak states, local communities where presence of government is actually weak. These are blockchains, for example, potentially offers strong coordination and self-governing mechanisms to actually enable that. But I just don't seem to hear that this kind of perspective in the discussion.
Thank you, Boyega.
I'm not sure exactly I understand your question, but if we start using blockchain, what will happen to UN? That's your question. Is it correct?
No, my question is that maybe in the UN, currently the discussion is too focused on blockchain as an infrastructure, all right? Like similar to the notion of distributed ledgers. But I'm saying that the blockchain concept and philosophy goes far beyond that. Jason has pointed out the global, economic, system that is possible. Governance, self-governance, local, organization and governance is a very, very important aspect of the original philosophy of blockchains. All right, and I'm saying that, but there's so much opportunity there in terms of development, and which we don't talk about. And that's why I want to hear from the UN perspective, are we too, is the focus too much on the infrastructure? What about the other aspects that are really closer, more closely related to development? That's my question, particularly governance.
I'm not sure if UN is focusing on infrastructure. I cannot speak for all different UN initiatives. There are tons of them at the moment. But one thing blockchain attracts people working in UN is philosophy, a fundamental philosophy. So the infrastructure maybe the coming as a tangible product. After all, we experienced many things. So what's happening is the remittance testing in Africa and Europe, and decentralized management of renewable energy is happening. Lots of things are happening, but what motivates us is fundamental philosophy expressed in the original Satoshi Nakamoto's paper. Many of us was just impressed by the way he or she or they thought about this world. But unfortunately, nothing is really materialized yet. But I think in the first place, we started working for United Nations with lots of idealism as a young boys and girls. And gradually we're changing. But anyway, that kind of philosophy is still appealing to us. I don't know if I answer your question.